What goes up must come down. It seems Isaac Newton's theory of gravity doesn't apply to food prices at restaurants and grocery stores. It's been 30 years since American consumers paid as much as they are now for food. Well, here to explain what's happening and why is Young Voices commentator Jonathan Hartley. Mr. Hartley is a research fellow at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity and research associate at the Hoover Institution. Okay, Jonathan, you've done the research. Although President Biden says Bidenomics is working, these statistics tell a different story. Although inflation has cooled a bit over last year, American consumers still paying high prices for groceries and food at restaurants. Why is that?
Well, you're absolutely right that food now makes up about 11% of disposable income of Americans, and this is the first time that's been the case since the 1990s. It's really important. This is actually a really important development because inflation historically has been higher for poor individuals, and that's really for two reasons. One, a greater share of the poor's income is spent on food and energy, and two, the poor spend a greater fraction of their income and save a lot less than higher income individuals. There's been a lot of discussion about what's caused inflation over the past a few years, which has been the greatest uptick in inflation since the 1980s. Some of the biggest debates have been around the role of supply chain bottlenecks from the pandemic, excessive fiscal stimulus that was passed under both the Trump and Biden administrations, and then also whether central banks like the Federal Reserve have been slow to raise interest rates in response. I think we have a lot to be grateful for in the sense that in the U.S., GDP is still rising. Compared to other countries, say in Western Europe or in Canada, where GDP per capita has been essentially flat for the past decade. So there's really something about American exceptionalism in economic growth, and that's a trend that I think is going to continue with the latest developments around AI that could potentially lead to a productivity boom that we haven't seen maybe since the age of the computer in the 1990s.
Yes, American workers are very hardworking, and I'm sure part of the food problem is the inability to move goods across the country. You'd mentioned that, touched on it. Transportation bottlenecks. The United States still suffers from a shortage of truck drivers. About 80,000 jobs are open. That number is expected to double within the next 5 to 10 years to 160,000. So how does that factor into high food costs?
Well, you're absolutely right that supply chain bottlenecks matter a lot. Remember, there's all these lockdowns, essentially, an imposed shutdown of the economy in many respects, and then you had all this fiscal stimulus. People had all these stimulus checks ready to spend, and then when they decided to reopen the economy in late 2021, 2022. There was this burst of spending, and a lot of those supply chains don't come back on as easily. Whether it's hiring, getting more truck drivers on the road, getting shipping items moving on time.
How about rising wages? I know many states have increased the minimum wage. I'm sure that means the local butcher or grocery store will raise their food prices to consumers to cover the cost increases, right? Or is it just price gouging?
Well, I'm I guess not a huge fan of the whole price gouging story. I don't think there's a whole ton of empirical evidence. I do think that there has been a role that policies played in all of this. We're seeing spending that was really at an unprecedented level, federal spending through everything from the CARES Act early on in the pandemic to the American Recovery Plan, the ARP, to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And so when you get so much more money in the economy chasing much fewer goods, you tend to get these sort of inflationary spurts, and so I think that's played a big role. I don't necessarily think that that minimum wage increases. They are generally pretty localized, and also we've seen trade policy that's shifted a bit, that makes the outsourcing of food from abroad somewhat more expensive. I think there's a number of things that have happened in recent years that potentially could explain why food prices have gone up so much.
Okay, we'll see where this all heads, especially in an election year. Young Voices commentator Jonathan Hartley. Thank you, Jonathan, for sharing those insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.